Can you let Francis in? Sorry to interrupt.
That's right.
Okay.
Right, can you all see my PowerPoint? Yeah, good eye. Okay, so the importance of supervision is what we're talking about. So I'm going to start this off by asking you guys a question. So you'll need to unmute yourself. Oh, can you see that? Because I've got you sitting right in front of, just going to move you over to the other side of my screen. So just to get feedback from you, can you please all tell me what you feel supervision is and what its purpose is?
Support for me.
Sorry, can I just ask Marcia, how do you know Francis is waiting? I've got nothing.
Oh, she asked me, could you let me into the meeting?
I've got nothing that's come up.
Ah.
Ask her.
Oh, when I'm free, sorry. So she's going to come in at some point.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Sorry about that, Linda. Sorry.
It's all right, don't worry. So support, Marcia, thank you. Any other thoughts?
I think it's about sometimes raising awareness of things that you're unaware, unconscious of.
Yeah.
I was going to say blind spots, transference, counter-transference.
Yeah.
Being able to sort of offload things, issues that you have yourself regarding supporting people.
Yeah, they're good answers.
And that other professional perspective, when you're in the thick of it yourself, you just get that clarity, don't you?
Yeah.
Ideas as well.
Yeah.
Skills, learning new skills as well, I'd say.
I don't know what I'm doing this for, you all know this. Brilliant. Okay. You guys have obviously got a pretty clear idea then, so that helps me moving on. This is my definition of what I feel that supervision is. I'll read this out to you. It's a bit wordy for a PowerPoint slide. So once a safe working relationship has been developed, both supervisor and supervisee can sit in open curiosity, where the therapist can bring mistakes and successes and strong counter-transferences, both negative and positive, and where both can work together to bring a deepening understanding of theoretical, psychological, ethical, personal, and other matters related to therapeutic work for discussion. Hopefully this creates a transforming process, so both have the courage to be open to praise, discussion, criticism, and reflection, and can sit with the discomfort, the discouragement, joy, anxiety, despair, laughter, and frustration in a crucible of change and growth that enriches both. So it's a bit long, and I'm sorry about that, but I don't think supervision is just one simple thing, and I'll go on to describe what I feel the relationship is in a minute. Does everybody understand what transference and counter-transference is? I see lots of nods. Good eye. So I'm going to ask you another question now. What do you feel you might need to talk about in supervision? And I know you've just given me a list of what supervision is. But I'm guessing from your answers you've all experienced supervision. Have you? Yeah, you all have. That's it. No, that's interesting, isn't it? So then tell me a bit of, without going into too much detail, what you have talked about in supervision that's been particularly helpful to you.
So for me, it's sometimes if I'm working with a client and I'm not necessarily getting the change that I'm expecting or something like that, it's really useful for me to talk it through. And I've found that through talking it through with a supervisor, it gives me the confidence, A, that I'm on the right track, and B, where to move to as well. So a little bit of advice and ideas. Your supervisor sometimes has got more training than you have in other areas, and so they'll be able to kind of point you in the right direction. So for me, that kind of sense of being able to talk things through about something that's been, or a client that I've been working with.
And also I would say is when we talk things through, and of course this is a tenet of therapy as well as supervision, when we talk things through, we realise and hear what we're thinking and feeling. And that very often enables us then to find our own solutions, because you realise when you're saying it, don't you? Oh my God, I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. So it's a massive learning opportunity of your own knowledge, becoming more aware of what you already understand. Yeah, that's a good one. Anybody else want to say anything?
I find if I've got some really complex clients, it's kind of like that support that I'm not the only one holding them.
Yeah.
Sometimes if they're particularly complex, to kind of talk it through, you know, what's the countertransference, what's going on, and just to kind of say it, talk it out loud, like you say, because once you're talking about it out loud, you kind of realise a lot yourself anyway.
Yes.
But I think that support for me is really important if I've got some complex clients.
No, I agree. And it can feel overwhelming sometimes, can't it, when you've got a complex client, or you think, oh my God, I'm not sure I can do this. I'm not sure I can hold this. I'm not sure I can manage the psychology of what's going on. And then, you hold that with your supervisor and work it through. Yeah, that's massive, really massive. Anything else?
I think for me, my supervision experience was in the world of domestic abuse, and it was incredibly helpful to, you know, with everything that's been said already, but to have more than one mind on safety. You know, when it's complex like domestic abuse, you know, am I working in the safest way I can, and actually who is responsible for this safety? You can feel it's all you and it's not.
No. And where to get involved and where not.
Yeah, absolutely.
With something like domestic abuse, because if somebody is then in that kind of chaos, then their whole life is under threat. I mean literally their life is under threat, but where they live, who they live with, who they relate to, where they go to work, all of that is potentially under threat, isn't it? And again, that's a lot to hold. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the seven-eyed model of supervision. Has anybody heard of this?
Yeah, I have. I did the training on this with BPS. It's
brilliant. Okay.
Brilliant.
So I'm just going to say very simply what this means to me, and I work with this myself with my supervisors. And the basic premise is that there are actually 7 relationships going on within the supervisory relationship, and it describes the complexity, but also describes what you can actually bring to supervision. So when I first started training as a counsellor and we were told what supervision was, I came away from that understanding that what I needed to do in supervision was take my clients to my supervisor, and they would oversee what was happening in the dynamic between my clients and me. And it wasn't actually until I trained as a supervisor that I understood there's a whole ton of other things that are also relevant to supervision. So that was an omission from my counselling training, which hit me quite a lot when I was training as a supervisor. So what we've got here is the 7 aspects. So first of all, you have the processes in the client, which will come with the therapist to supervision, their understanding of them. Then we have the interventions that the therapist might use with the client, their relevance, their value, etc. Then you have the relationship that the therapist has with the client. So there's 3 aspects just there that are in the therapist-client relationship. And of course, you have the therapist's processes around the client as well. So all of that is relevant to the dynamic of what's going on between the 2 of them. Then you have a kind of similar thing going on between the supervisor and the therapist. So you have the relationship between the supervisor and the therapist, and through that, the supervisor's relationship with your client. And then you have the supervisor's processes, her thoughts and feelings about what's going on in the dynamic between her and her supervisee and between the therapist and the client. And then finally, 7, you have the wider context of all 3 people involved in this relationship. So, and some of it is not always accessible in therapy. So if you think therapist working with client, you're not always entirely aware of the context in which your client is living, social, family, economic realities, that kind of thing. We're not always fully aware, but they're always directly relevant. And the same goes on with the therapist and the supervisor, but particularly with the therapist and the supervisor, you may have organisational constraint and context. So if the therapist is working for an organisation, then the organisation will have rules of how the therapist is to work, and that could impinge sometimes quite seriously on the therapist's work. So for instance, very often in organisations, therapists are limited to 6 sessions only, or maybe 12. And that affects deeply. If they've got a really complicated client, then you have to start managing what you can actually deal with in the number of sessions you've got, just to give you an example. And then finally, professional code and ethics. So they vary quite extensively depending on the kind of therapist that you are and which professional association you belong to. But that is also deeply relevant, and it's the supervisor's job to keep an eye on that and to be familiar with the codes and ethics of the therapist that he/she is working with. So you can see that there are opportunities there for the therapist to talk with her supervisor. When I say her, I mean him or her, about a massive range of things. It's not necessarily just what is going on in therapy with a client. There could be a lot of other things. And there may indeed be some personal things for the therapist in her personal processes that are impinging on her capacity to work therapeutically, and that may need to come into supervision too. So you always be aware of, this is personal development in the therapist to access the supervisor and to identify maybe training needs or developmental needs or you know, what books to read. All of that kind of thing is all relevant as well. So it's quite it can be quite a complicated relationship until you get used to working with your supervisor. So I've just made a list here of some of the things. Some of them are really general and you've covered a lot of it already. But I've just put a list of some of the things that I've come across that you maybe weren't even expecting in therapy that you might need to refer to your supervisor about. So you have a suicidal client, and that may be somebody you've even worked with for a long time and you were unaware they were suicidal, and they come in one day and they say they've got suicidal thoughts. You might panic and wonder what the hell to do, and that's where your supervisor would come in. The same thing with domestic abuse, or indeed any kind of abuse. If you've not dealt with that before, you need to know what to do. Where would you get support if somebody complains about you to your professional association? Because at that point, the professional association will cease supporting you and start supporting the client. And where do you go with it? You're going to feel on your own. Yes, you've got your insurance, so you would speak to your insurance company, but you really need somebody to walk you through the process, and you'd go to your supervisor. Something said in the session upsets you, and the next one triggers you into your own grief, your own stuff, in inverted commas. And where do you go with that? You need to own that. If something is happening that is relating to you personally, or a client has said or done something that has upset you, how are you going to manage that in your relationship with your client? You need to be very careful at that point that you don't project your stuff onto them. You need to own it yourself and take it to your supervisor. Something has passed between you and your client that plays on your mind, or you're not even quite sure what happened. And I think that can happen quite a lot. That happens quite a lot in ordinary relationships sometimes, let alone in what might be going on with your client. And depending on the kind of therapy that you do, that could happen as a massage therapist. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're a psychological or talking therapist. And then the atmosphere changes between you and your client, and you don't know what to do about it. You don't know how to address it with your client, and you feel maybe a bit confused. And the next item also kind of fits into that. There is a dynamic that you don't understand in conversational body language with your client. So you may have been working with somebody for a long time, you may feel that you know them, and they come in one day and they're behaving differently and they're not telling you about it, or your therapy is not relevant for them to tell you about it, but there's something going on and you don't know what it is. And it's really good then at that point to have a third party to talk it through with and understand, or begin to try and understand what might be happening. And the final thing I thought was, is if you make a mistake, and God, we all do that, don't we? We make a mistake with our client. We say the wrong thing, we might do the wrong thing, we might use the wrong product, if it's a massage thing. I don't know, it could be a million things. I've made more mistakes than I care to own up to, frankly. I think we all do it, we're all human. And that's when you really need to check in with your supervisor and say, I think I've ballsed up. Can we just talk through the ramifications of this? And I've had that happen. I'm sure you all have at some point. And then you want a safe pair of hands where you can just talk it out, have your panic attack, do whatever it is you're going to do, and hopefully move on, organise a plan of action, whatever. So, right, I've just got to move your lovely faces over again because that's on the other side of this one. So supervision for me is about continued growth beyond qualification. It's about an increased understanding of yourself and how you support others. It's about becoming more self-aware. We learn so much more when we talk about things openly in a trusting relationship. And it's about being curious, open-minded, and always willing to learn more. So sometimes you really have to put your butt on the line in supervision and say, I feel really embarrassed and stupid and I've done something daft, and you need to be able to talk about it. And when I was first training as a counsellor, I found that really difficult to do because I felt such an idiot, and I thought my supervisor's going to think I'm utter shit and she's going to report me to my professional body and make me stop working as a counsellor. So I had a lot of fear. And then as you develop a trusting relationship, you begin to realise that that's much less likely unless you do something really serious, of course. And actually, it's a pair of hands to help you steer yourself and to help you to learn and develop. And finally, what I do within my supervision is some business mentoring. So for me, it's okay for somebody to talk about the business aspects of their practice, because therapists are often really good at their therapy, but they may not be quite so hot in running a business or setting up in business if they're just in. So I'm perfectly happy to talk about any aspects of business, including finance and accounting and the dreaded tax man, marketing planning, planning your space to work in, social media, website, your professional association, and I put blah de blah de blah de blah because often as therapists we think, oh my god, this is the bit I really don't want to do. Some stuff you might not want to do because you want to get on being a therapist, but you still need to have those things in place and be aware of what's needed. So to me, that's some personal stuff that is also relevant in supervision and fine to talk through. And here endeth the end. I don't know quite how long that took, but hopefully it was about 10 minutes anyway. So has anybody got any questions about anything I've said or any other aspect of supervision?
So how structured would you say supervision is, Linda? Is it is there a structure to it, or would you say?
Do you mean?
Yeah.
No. not in that sense. So it's therapist led most of the time.
Mm.
So the therapist will come with whatever they want to talk about, whether mostly it will be clients, because, you know, so I can't take all of my clients to supervision because I have too many in an hour and a half in a month. But I will cherry pick maybe ones that I'm struggling with a bit more, or something that's come up that I need to plan about, or I've got a new client that I haven't introduced to my supervisor. So I will take those. I give my supervisor a list of all of the clients that I'm working with every month. So she has an overview and she knows if I've omitted to talk to her about any of them at some point or another. But I will also talk about other aspects of my life, maybe something I'm struggling with personally that I think is impacting on my practice, or anything else that is relevant really, and I will run it. She will obviously occasionally intervene and say, I think you've missed looking at it from that aspect, or there's another aspect here that we need to have a look at, or you're in dead lumber, mate, let's sort out how we can handle this, or whatever it is. But it's mostly client-led.
Mm. And what about, have you had any therapists come for supervision with regards to going back to face-to-face, as I was mentioning about earlier?
No.
I know there's, you know, lots of therapists. I think I made a comment about going back face-to-face on my networking profile, and a couple of people said, oh, I've been doing it for ages, you know, it's fine. And yet other people are really worried about that face-to-face aspect.
No, I haven't had mine talking to me about that. I've had one or two people who've now started coming to me for supervision because they have gone back to working with clients again, because they were without clients.
Yeah.
So I've had that, but I haven't had anybody talking to me about their COVID-19 protocol.
That's interesting.
I'm perfectly happy to support people with that. I've got one in place myself, obviously. So, yeah, it would seem highly relevant, but it's interesting. I haven't had clients or supervisees talking to me about COVID. And I would have.
No clients.
Not clients either. No. Several of them have said to me they've been thinking things through during lockdown and hence they want to come for therapy. But I haven't had people absolutely terrified of coronavirus and have that anxiety. I haven't had that. But anxiety is not one of my specialisms, so I probably tend not to attract that type of client. Has anybody else had that?
Oh, I've had a lot of anxious clients.
Have you?
Yeah. But it is one of my specialities. So
right, okay. Yeah. So you're attracting that kind of person.
Yeah. Can I ask a question, Linda? How important is it, you think, that your supervisor matches your skill set? Because I've struggled over the years to find a supervisor. Since my last one retired, I've really struggled to find someone.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I'm not so sure. I suppose loosely skill set is important, but much more important to me is the quality of the relationship I can build. And I have struggled in the past finding a supervisor that can work with me and the woo-woo end of things, because I'm also a healer and I combine that in the work that I do. And I've had one or two supervisors look down their nose at me because they don't want to work with that.
Yeah.
So in the end, I looked for the most qualified supervisor I could find. The one I have now is a doctor of psychology. She's also a psychotherapist and a counsellor, and she's quite woo-woo oriented. And I worked with her for the last 2.5 years, and we have developed quite a strong relationship that I find incredibly supportive. She's the best I've ever had, but it's taken me 10 years to find her. I've had one or two others who were very good, and their theory-based didn't matter.
Okay.
And they were accepting of what I do, but didn't understand.
Yeah.
I had to try and explain healing to people, and that's quite tough actually if people don't understand anything about it or the boundaries of it. So I think theory matters up to a point.
Okay.
but I've supervised massage therapists and reflexologists, healers and counsellors and psychotherapists. So, and I've found that even with massage, you're talking about similar kinds of things in supervision. So I would happily work with any kind of therapist. I also work with an animal healer and communicator and work with her as well. So that kind of thing matters less, I think, as long as you feel you can build a trusting relationship and accept each other and each other today. Sometimes it's really nice to work with somebody with a different theory base because both of you learn masses from that.
Yeah, I work with somebody, my previous supervisor was very clinical, which I'm not at all. I'm probably more the woo end. Although my training is very clinical, but I don't really work in that way anymore. And that was actually quite useful. And in fact, she changed some of her practices as well, because I think she became a bit more convinced about less clinical interventions.
Interesting.
Yeah, but since she retired, and I've really struggled since then to find anyone who's
it's difficult,
open-minded enough, I think.
Oh, that's a shame, and I have come up against that.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of supervisors out there. You've just got to shop around, really. I know it's difficult, but I think the more experienced you get as a therapist, the better you are at finding the right supervisor for you, because you kind of formulated yourself and you kind of know how you're working.
Yeah, I've had a few one-off meetings, but I just didn't
click.
No.
Keep going. You'll find the right one. I ended up, I think, before I started working with mine, I think I saw about 6.
Oh, okay, well that gives me faith then. That gives me because you do start to wonder if it's you.
No, I think we're also very different, and even with counselling and psychotherapy, each individual therapist works differently. Whatever theory base, you bring your whole self into the therapy, don't you? So we all work differently. So it is important to find somebody. I mean, you like them, but obviously not in friend terms, but you feel that you can trust that they have the authenticity and the honesty that you want. So mine will say to me, she did yesterday, I was telling her about 2 particularly difficult exchanges I had had. And she said, okay, I can see why you've handled it that way, and that was good, and this was not so good, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of it, she said, now, do you want me to tell you some feedback? So I said, yeah, I knew you were going to. Go on, dish it out. And then she told me, I thought, oh, bugger, let me just crawl under the desk here while I realised the big mistake that I had made. But I know when she feeds back to me, it's honest and straightforward. There's no game going on. It's not about power and control. It is genuinely her concern for me being a good therapist. And that's, so you've got to go find somebody who you feel is going to be what you want in a supervisor. It's hard, I know, but you will find somebody.
I think that's a key point, Linda. When you trust somebody enough to know that they've got your back and your interest is at the core of it, and you can almost hear anything from them.
Yes. Mine has taught me so much, I can't tell you. She's helped me grow up. She really has, in a big way. And I wouldn't work without supervision. Never.
And as you were talking, I was, Linda knows how I feel. That's why I think group supervision can be so rich, because you get so many more perspectives, so many more models. And if you use something like the 7 layers of supervision, as I call it, when you said, is there a structure in the supervisor's mind? There is, because she's probably got that model in her mind in the whole conversation.
Yeah.
And then it's incredibly rich in group supervision.
Yeah. And just you reminded me, Liz, to add that in to the members of the Therapist Network, we would love to set up group supervision, and that's completely free. And Liz and I know, are waiting for more people to inquire about it. So it's on the website for members. If you want to be in group supervision and you're a member, let me or Liz know, and we'll set the group up. Once we've got 3, we could set it up actually, and would grow it probably to a maximum of 6.
And the way I see group supervision or supervision is literally super vision.
Absolutely.
Collective vision. It's not the hierarchical model with somebody top. No. It's literally that collective supervision.
Yeah, it is. And that's the thing about supervision. The supervisor has professional responsibility for the therapist with them. So although the supervisor is not the boss of you, if you do something that is unethical, it is their responsibility to manage that with you and to let your professional body know if it comes to it. So most of it is not managerial, most of it is 2 equals in the room, but that's why the supervisory relationship can feel really complicated sometimes. She is overseeing your work in that sense.
Do we have a separate list of supervisors within the network, Linda?
That's a very good question. I can't answer. I think Claire might have. I'll ask her.
I don't think I've put on there that I've trained as a supervisor with BPS. May need to ask.
There's the supervisors group set up on the Therapist Network website for all qualified supervisors, because we're trying to set up a group. But that may be as specific as it's got about supervision.
Right. I was just thinking from Joanne's point of view, it might be useful if we had a list of people that we could say from the network who are supervisors.
Indeed, yeah. It's a good idea. I'll speak to Claire about it, and perhaps email me, Joanne, if you're interested in that. And then we'll yeah, you're muted.
Yes, that would be great, because I've only been back in the UK for 2 months after 13 years away, so I'm
okay.
Yeah, that's like my #1 priority, is finding a supervisor. Yeah.
And are you a counsellor?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I trained here, and then I've been working overseas for 13 years. So yeah.
I'll see if we can do that for you, Joanne. If you email me,
okay.
Then I'll put my email in the chat. Then that will be a reminder sitting in my inbox until I get a chance to speak to Claire to extract it out of our database. I'm not going to talk while I type, because I tend to type gobbledygook.
Linda, I'm just going to ask a question while you're typing then. Do you see the supervision group as being supervisor-led? I mean, how do you... No, I didn't think so.
Oh, no. No, a meeting of equals, I would say. Yeah. And we kind of all supervise and share with each other. I don't know. No, not supervisor-led at all. Even if there's any supervisors in the room, it won't be necessary. Yeah. It could be mixed therapies as well, as far as I'm concerned. As long as people understand how to use supervision, that would be enough for people to join if they're interested. Because I think that adds something really interesting into the mix as well.
Francis, I love your backdrop there.
Hello, Liz. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi, Francis. How are you?
Hi, Liz. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Francis.
Hello, Marcia.
Right, I think, is that the end of questions? Anything else anybody wants to say? No. We're fine then. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Interesting and informative. Thank you for your answers. Thank you.
So it sounds like we only need one more person to start, maybe.
I think so, yeah.
So does it sound, is it like a peer supervision, Linda?
Yeah.
By the sounds of it, yeah. Yeah, sounds good.
Another thing actually, Linda, that might be useful for anyone who perhaps hasn't had supervision is cost-wise. What would you expect to pay for supervision, and how long would a supervisory session be?
So a supervisory session is the same as a counselling session, so it's 50 minutes. I charge 60. The costs vary, different supervisors. My supervisor charges me about the same.
Okay.
So you pay some money and you take the choice. Really. Probably anywhere between 50 and 70, I would say.
I think it depends on your professional body, how much they require you to have, or how many clients that you've got as well, how much supervision.
Yes, yeah. So any members of the BACP, I think the ruling still is that up to 8 clients means you can have an hour a month, but beyond that you have to have an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And that's the same with the NCS as well, the National Counselling Society.
Yeah, I know the hypnotherapy world is usually about 6 hours a year, but it really depends on how many clients that you're having.
6 hours a month, you mean? Yeah.
6 hours a year.
Oh, 6 hours a year supervision.
Yeah, it's a half an hour a month.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's very different to what counselling. I've always had an hour and a half a month.
Yeah.
Because I'm a counsellor as well as a hypnotherapist.
Yes.
But yeah, it's not a lot really.
No, it's not a lot, is it? No. Okay. Very different.
So, is there any other questions, observations for Linda before we go out into our breakout rooms? Get to know each other a bit better. And if you want to, because we obviously online, we can't share business cards. If you wanted to share your details in the chat box, so if anyone wants to get hold of you and find out a bit more about what you do, then please feel free to share in the chat box.
Good thing to do actually, and save it at the end of the meeting, then you've got everybody's contacts.
Yeah, that's good. I think Judy's going to sort out the breakout rooms.
Yeah, let me have a look.
How long are we going to be in there for?
So we've got
10 minutes, we do, or 15?
Yeah, so should we do 15 minutes?
Yeah.
So let me create rooms. Sorry, it's been a while since I've done this. So add a room.
Oh, okay, Liz. Nice to see you. You have to pop off.
Okay, Liz. Bye.
Great to see you. Bye.
Bye, Liz.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, bye, sweetheart.
So cute.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Nice to see you.
I think these